myself a little bit. I'm Bethany Sanderson, one of the substitute teaching leaders here, and these 4 others are the staff of our class. As far as I understand, staff, that doesn't mean we're getting paid. That just means we're in charge of this class and making decisions. They may not have cut me in though, so we'll talk about that later if we're actually getting paid. But so I want to give you a little background on how this night kind of came together. Quite a few months ago, we asked our class to give us some questions, and from there we just prayerfully went through them and boiled them down, combined them, and tried to kind of figure out what questions would be best to cover from there. But I want you to know that each one of these conversations, each one of these questions that we're covering could be 5-hour coffee dates. So we are just scratching the surface of each one of these conversations. We really want to begin and show and model what that looks like to have a good conversation about that. We tried to cover a really good aspect of, dating and married and singleness and different things that you struggle with. So I think one of the things we would like to challenge you with tonight is just if it's a married question or a single question or something that you don't struggle with, to not check out because it's not something that relates directly to you. We think you have friends or family members that have walked down these roads and are still single or are married, and you can speak into that. If you're single, you probably want to be married at some point, so the married questions are relevant to hopefully what looks like in your future. So things like that. Throughout the night, the questions that we're answering are going to be up on the screen with the Bible verses that kind of go along with them. We may or may not directly call out what the Bible verse is, but we wanted you to know that those are kind of where the answers are being stemmed from. Tomorrow we will post the questions on our Facebook and the answers, so feel free to take a picture of those if you'd like to, but we'll have those posted later. And we also have a handout for you on your way out from the segregated breakouts that have resources that we've come up that are helpful and have been important to us in our growth as well. Not just ours, but our BSF leadership have come up with that. So those questions are also on the back with the Bible verses there as well. So we're going to start here, have a conversation first, and then we're going to break out into segregated rooms and continue having a conversation. So with that, I think we're going to introduce ourselves briefly and then get started. Steve said not to start with him, so we're not going to start with him. We'll start with Aaron down there. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell you where we are in life and one adjective or two or whatever you come up with that describes how you feel about that life stage that you're in.
Hello, I'm Aaron Osborne. I'm also the other STL of the class. Where I'm at in life, I'm currently here with you guys on stage. I am married to my wife Audrey, who's in the back. We've been married for 1 year and some change. So I would say as of right now, her and I have kind of been walking through a challenging road, especially as of the last couple months. It's been a stretching thing. I think the Lord has us in a specific place to teach us something, and we're kind of in the midst of it and looking to where the Lord will provide. And I'd say challenging would be the adjective.
Are we skipping Steve because he hasn't come up with a word yet?
No, I was just waiting to be called on.
You don't need to be called on.
I don't want to talk out of turn. So, my name is Steve, and this is my wife Rebecca, and we're the teaching leaders in this class. So where I'm at in life is happily married for 20 years and some change, almost 22 I believe it is. So 3 kids, all girls, and teenagers. So I would say where I'm at in life, or the word would be challenged. Not in my marriage, but just challenge to how do you continue to walk alongside your kids as they grow older and as they teach them some independence and just walk through some difficult things. And we're not in Kansas anymore, so it's a big dark world, and walking alongside of them as they walk in some difficult stuff that they deal with. And so how do you show the love of the Father to your kids? And so it's challenging as a fallen man, but it is challenging and fun.
All right, so as Steve said, I'm Rebecca. It has been 22 years. I just did the math. He actually remembers our wedding date better than me, so I always have to double check myself. But if I was to describe where we're at, obviously, yeah, we're in this season of marriage, but I would describe it as rediscovering. Because we have been through a lot of years where our kids have been very dependent, and now we're on the flip side where they're very independent. And we're rediscovering what this looks like to kind of hang out with each other. And we'll get into this even later tonight of doing ministry together, and just even be able to vacation together without kids. So it is a little bit of rediscovering like what we all have in common and what to talk about outside of BSF and kids and all of that.
I'm Andra. I'm the class administrator, so typically not up here. I am single, and the word I would use to describe where I am in life is learning. Learning how to live life in the state. I definitely did not picture myself like this at this age. But also learning how to meet new people and just do life well.
I thought your word was going to be mingling.
Well, I left that one for you.
I chose a different word. So my name is Bethany again, and one of the substitute teaching leaders. And my word is not mingling. Oh, single. So that's why she made that joke. My word I think would be active, in this idea that my life is happening right now. I'm not waiting for marriage for my life to begin, and just wanting to live that well. So that's where I would say active is the word. Yeah, not preach. All right, we can end now, guys. That was great. So we're going to open in prayer, and then we will dive in.
Father, thank you for the opportunity that we have to come here together as a group, Lord, and to dig into some difficult topics. Lord, and I just pray that this night, Father, that you would be glorified. Lord, that the things that are said here, the things that are thought here, would be glorified. Lord, we desire to walk a life that's pleasing to you, in a life that you intended. So, Lord, I just pray that tonight would be helpful. Lord, that we would be encouraged by what we hear, that we would learn something, Lord, that we can use in our lives to be forward. Father, I just pray that you would encourage us by your Spirit. Lord, would your Spirit just be with each one of us up here as we're all nervous, all a little bit vulnerable, Lord. And so I just pray that you would just give us comfort, give us the peace that surpasses all understanding, Lord, and that we would just glorify you.
All right, so our first question that we're going to start off with is, should come up on the screen here. Has God chosen someone specifically for me? And how should I be looking and what should I be looking for? And is it possible that God has called us to a life of singleness?
I think I'll start us off, especially along the topic of, has God actually picked out someone I'm supposed to be with? I feel like this is something that all of us walk through at some point. I remember being there just a few years ago, and it's tough, it's hard, it's confusing. You're reminded that daily you make the wrong decisions, and I personally have a hard time making my mind up with small decisions, like what am I going to wear this morning, and what do I want to order at this restaurant? So when it comes to something that's the rest of your life and you're committing it to the Lord, it's tricky, but at the same time, though it looks like a free choice to me as a human, God on the other side of eternity, I would say certainly has chosen someone for those he's called to be married, and he knows exactly who that is. So not only does God already know who you're going to marry, but he chose them, he picked them specifically for you. So it's nice that he also didn't leave us in the dark as to how we can be looking. First off, I think this is of utmost importance, is prayer. No matter where you're at, whether you're dating or single or praying for maybe somebody else in their relationship. I think we're all called to do it and lift other people up in prayer. I think God works very powerfully in that, changes and steers our hearts towards that which He is looking for. One verse that came to my mind was James 1:5, that just talks about if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and will be given to them. So, if this is a gray area for you and you don't know, ask God. He's pleased for those that are seeking Him, and I think He can provide answers in very specific ways. Another verse that came up was 2 Corinthians 6:14, and I think this is going to be one that is brought up in several of our questions and even in our breakout sessions. God's Word tells us that a suitable spouse is to be a fellow believer. I think that's obviously very important. It is to God. Some other verses and passages you might want to jot down. Both Ephesians 5 and 1 Timothy 3 give a really good picture of what a husband and wife relationship would look like. And in the midst of that, especially Ephesians 5 gives a lot of details of what we could be looking for. 1 Timothy 3 talks about overseers and deacons, so mature believers, people that you would trust as an overseer in the church. These are people that you can look for, and certainly ones that the Lord would have us be in a relationship with. So, the other aspect I would say is for those people that may already be married or may be questioning and think they made the wrong choice. I don't think that our choices diminish God's view of marriage. I think He's still able to be very much at work in that. And He's able to redeem and sanctify. We serve a God who gives new life and who is constantly challenging us. So I think that even in the midst of what may appear to be a wrong choice or doubt, once again, go back to prayer and God's Word, and I think the Lord can work powerfully in that. And I think He can honor what marriages are already out there. And I would just say, as maybe a last point, is that we're all imperfect people. We're never going to find somebody that checks every box on the list. There's always going to be things and areas of compromise and communication, and our ultimate standard that we look to is Christ. I think that's the best way to view a relationship is when both the husband and wife are looking towards Christ as the model of perfection, because we're not there yet, but we're striving for it. So.
Yeah, James 1:5 is a verse that stuck out to me as well. But if you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously. And kind of coupled with Proverbs 3, trusting the Lord with all your heart, and not on your own understanding. Some of you may have heard of this thing called online dating, and you may be wondering, is that an okay thing to try? Should I do it? Should I not do it? There's some stigmas around doing it. I'm not going to tell you yes or no, you should or should not. More of go to God in prayer. Ask, is this the right thing for me? And is this the right thing for me right now? There may be times where it's not the right thing at the moment. Or there might be times where it is. If you do try it, remember why you're doing it. If you're like me, you're trying to find a spouse. So you're not trying to find 1 or 7 online pen pals. Don't just converse with them forever. Meet them if they have potential. If they do have potential and you're going to meet them, I would encourage you to do it in a public setting. Drive there yourself. Don't have them pick you up. They're virtually a stranger at this point. And tell someone that cares about you, whether it's a close friend or your family. That way they not only, 1, can encourage you, because it's kind of weird, but also 2, they can make sure you come home after the date.
Or get you out of it.
Or get you out of it, yes. You can set up a text on,
Never happened.
is this working or not? You can also try it out with a friend. Sometimes it can be fun to do it together, and you can share stories, frustrations, and laughs. But the trusting in God not only comes in that part, but comes in that you may be going on lots of first dates and then they don't go anywhere. You might be going out with one person for a while and it seems to go really well, and then there's something that just stops it, and you're not quite sure why, or you're frustrated. Talk with God, ask questions, wrestle with Him. That's what He wants, a relationship. But also, as you're in the state of either dating or single, I like the 1 Corinthians 7 verse about how an unmarried woman is concerned with the Lord's affairs. So, for a while when I was younger, I was thinking like, oh, I really want to serve with my husband someday. And I wasn't looking for serving opportunities on my own. Well, years later, I was like, well, this is dumb. I might be waiting forever. So live your life. If you find something that's fun, do it. You might actually meet your spouse that way too.
Yeah, I definitely felt that too. And enjoy it and embrace this life of singleness as a gift, right? I think I'll never forget, like, my early to mid-20s, I'm like, oh, when you're content in God, then you're gonna find Him. And it's like, no, marriage is not like this, what's the word I want? It's not a reward that you, like, had a great relationship with God, and singleness is your punishment because you haven't had a great relationship with God. But I think we view it that way, as like, oh, well, okay, I'm obviously not doing this well enough. And what does that look like? So like I said at the beginning, right, you're not in this waiting period for your life to begin. You're in this specific season that God has really blessed you with, that you're able to serve Jesus wholeheartedly. And that's not new to you guys that are single, right? You know, when you've heard this, Paul's single, Jesus is single, but it really is this gift. And the sooner you start really seeing that and praying that God gives you this view that it's a gift, I think you're going to see the change in the way that you walk through your life. Also, just do fun things in your singleness. Like, I think it's the same with like where I'm going to serve. I always wanted to travel. Like, oh, travel's a passion of mine. I was like, why am I waiting for a husband? Nope, I'm going to go to the Olympics by myself, because that seems like a wise decision. It was a class, by the way. But even little things like this, and this is going to be done, but I do this every year, and when we fall back an hour and we gain an hour, I purposely stay in bed. Because I'm like, you know what, someday I may have kids and I may have a family, but right now I don't, so I'm going to enjoy this time. Because I don't want to look back and go, oh, I wish I enjoyed the singleness that I had. I want to be able to embrace it and enjoy it in the moments that I have. Even just the other day, my sister-in-law posted something on Facebook, and seriously, I was like crying as I'm reading this, because it was just this recognition of the way that I could use my time to be able to invest in my nephews in a way that people with kids and being married would not be able to do. I didn't do it for the recognition, but man, sometimes it feels good to go, yeah, somebody's noticing that you're using your time and your energy for that reason. So, yeah, sometimes I wish I knew if there was an expiration date to this season of my life. Because like Andrew, I've been in it a little longer than I expected to be in it, but when I look back, I think, you know, even if I knew the expiration date, it shouldn't change the way that I'm living and the way that I view this time that I have right now. God has gifted this to me, and sometimes it's not easy, if I'm really honest, but most of the time it's pretty awesome if you could really pray and ask God to give you that to you. So.
Idea that you bring your singleness into marriage, if that's what God has for you. Who you are in that period of singleness and who you develop yourself to be in your relationship with God all carries into a marriage. And so just I reiterate what you guys are saying, is to really make the most of that time, particularly in your pursuit of God.
All right, we're going to move on to our second question, which is, are there things I should be willing to compromise on when looking for a future spouse? And are there non-negotiables?
So first, we have to remember that Jesus is the only perfect man to walk the earth. Only perfect person. So fortunately and unfortunately, our significant other is not going to be perfect. Marriage consists of two imperfect people, and that includes yourself. Coming together to create a place of unconditional love, sacrifice, and stability. There may be things that are nice to have. My husband known to skip a beat if I see a guy with a really nice head of hair. Or I might be hair, yes.
Okay.
I know, it's a unique one.
Is hair a set?
Hmm?
You said set of hair?
Head.
That's not clarifying. Maybe others need a clarification.
Wasn't going to be my focus, but yeah. Or I might be looking for someone that's a little more outgoing than me. But these are not necessarily make or break items. There's some more solid principles that we can apply when we're refining our standards before the Lord. One is that they're a believer in Christ. 2 Corinthians 6 talks about not being yoked together with unbelievers. And this is a central foundation from where your motives, beliefs, and worldviews flow. There may be something you learn about your significant other while dating or once you're married that may be new and surprising. But if you come from being a Christ follower, you're all starting with the same foundation. Godly character is another very important thing. 1 Corinthians 15 says, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." Then in Galatians, we read about the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So that's quite the list. So how do we find that out when we're getting to know the person that we think we might be marrying? I would encourage you to ask questions while you're with them, but also as you reflect on the time you've spent with them. Some questions might be, how do they treat strangers, their family, or their friends? How are they under stress or pressure? How do they spend their money? Can I be myself around them? And do they challenge me to grow in my relationship with Christ? These are just a few. There'll be many more that come to mind. The last one I'm going to touch on is have your family and friends approve of your relationship. Proverbs 15:22 says, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." You may have heard the saying, "Love is blind." Well, there's something to that. So spending time with your friends and family while you're dating is helpful, and they can help you gain perspective and be maybe a little more objective than you may be on your own. Just remember that they love you and they want the best for you. So they may bring something up that they see as maybe a concern. That can be the trickiest piece. So try to keep that conversation channel open, but even more importantly, bring it to God. Again, praying through this and the struggle is so important, and you can grow as well during that process.
So Andrew, you said it was a set of hair that made your heart skip a beat. So if you had asked me like what standards I had when I was dating, I would have told you I like a guy who's tall, I like a guy who's blonde, I like a guy with blue eyes, I like a guy who likes to read books, someone that will go for like walks with me and ride bike. Especially important is one who would live in a big city, because that is where I wanted to live. And definitely it was a bonus if they really liked like artsy things. And going to the theater and all that kind of stuff. And
1 for 10, ain't bad.
I thought, wow, you made one of them. Brought up this idea of pursuing someone who has Christ at the center of their life. And notice I want to go beyond even just the word believer or just shows up at church, to really go on somebody who has Christ at the very center. Because here's the thing, God himself and Christ are love. And if there's going to be true love in a relationship, then you've got to have God at the center of all of that. And I've had the experience of walking with a pretty significant number of women that have been in marriages that have been between a believer and a non-believer. And here's kind of what I've is you've got two people who are going in two different directions. In fact, I think twice that verse in 2 Corinthians 6 was brought up. Let me just give you the Message version of it, because it just said, I think it really stresses this. Don't become partners with those who reject God. How can you make a partnership out of right and wrong? That's not partnership, that's war. Is light best friends with darkness? Does Christ go strolling with the devil? Does mistrust and trust hold hands? And I can tell you, as I've walked alongside some of these women, this is what I've seen when it says that's war. There has been conflict, there has been confusion, because you've got different values, you've got different perspectives, all which play themselves out in so many decisions and aspects of life and the direction of life. But I also will go a step beyond that and say, within those relationships, there is a lack of the deepest level of intimacy, because that is spiritual intimacy. And you can only get to that level of spiritual intimacy with a spouse when you both have Christ at the center, and He's the one who draws you together. That being said, I look at Steve and I's own experience, and honestly, we walked into marriage, and neither one of us are walking well with the Lord at all. We were very ignorant of His intent for marriage, or even knowing how important it would be that we both needed to be passionately pursuing Him. And what we saw is, despite us, God's grace reached in. And so, you know, there may be some of you, and the reason I say that, I don't know how many of my marrieds we've got, or how many of you have people that are walking in that situation where they're in marriage, and there is pretty big spiritual differences between a believer and unbeliever. You know, God's grace is strong. God's grace is strong. And even within that kind of marriage, there's promises. 1 Corinthians 7, 12 to 16 talks about, if you find yourself in that situation, do make the best of it by living out your faith as passionately as possible, because who knows, God could use you or that person you know in their family to save and to allow His grace to reach into the rest of their lives.
So, you're going to go for it.
I guess I would just say as well, you know, when we talk about are there things that we shouldn't compromise, I would say, you know, when you make a decision of this is the character, or this is the characteristic of somebody that I'm looking for, it's going to be a lot easier to compromise as you start to fall in love with that person, as you spend more time with them. And so I would just say, so often, you know, I don't do any dating anymore, obviously, but I work with a lot of young people, and so I get to walk alongside of them in some of these situations. And here's what I can say is, if you start off your dating with a plan of just saying, I want to get to know these three things about this person on date number one, and I want to let God will confirm that. If you, like Aaron talked about, just praying, that God would reveal things, just set some things and say, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I consider godly characteristics, because it does not get easier as the road goes on. And often I see that as well, where those compromises are, you know, a lot easier to make the farther down the road that you go, and the more you make decisions with that are based on emotion, right?
Which kind of segues us into our third question, is talking about how we keep our relationships from becoming an idol, whether it's dating or married, that distract us from Jesus. Steve, I believe you were going to touch on that one a little bit as well.
Yeah. So, funny story, real quick, just ADD, since I know we've got time, but my watch just went off, and I'm getting used to this Apple stuff, but it said breathe. So, not sure if I'm stressed out or nervous or whatever. Reminded me to start breathing, so in my heart.
We don't have a minute for you to pause the breathe.
So if I fall over, someone help me breathe here. Anyway, I think before we really I think before we talk about whether this is important, let's talk or why this is important. Let's talk a little bit about why it's important to not have your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend become an idol. So first off, God's word tells us, right, that we're not to have any idols before Him. But so really, what is God saying? He's saying He needs to be the center of our relationship. This doesn't matter if you're dating or if you've been married for 22 years. It's a struggle. It is a struggle to keep God at the center of a relationship, or to keep God at the center and not bring your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse into that center. So why is that important? Because God has a purpose for a relationship. And He has fruit to bear inside of that relationship. And if we don't keep Him at the center of it, we're not going to bear the fruit that He intended us to bear, not all of it. And so it's important to keep Him at the center. And the other reason it's important is because if He is not at the center of the relationship, something else will be. And this is something else that we see in different relationships where God is not at the center. We could go into all kinds of examples. Sex being at the center of a relationship. I've seen that with friends of mine. I've seen that with guys that I work with, that their whole relationship is built on sex, and it creates a real mess. And I can leave it at that. So really, how do we maintain this person? I think that God at the center. I think prayer is a big part of that. And again, we're going to keep going back to prayer. But I can tell you in our relationship, as we struggle with it, I can tell you when God is at the center of it, we're in prayer together. And we pray together. And so whether you're married or whether you're dating, to develop a good habit of coming together in prayer is a critical piece. Another thing is, in a management philosophy, they say, don't expect results until the people that you're managing know what results you expect. And so, not that a dating relationship, you're not managing the person, but it's a good idea to communicate your intention. Hey, so my goal in this relationship is that I would keep God at the center. I really care about you, but it's important to me to have a godly character. And in order to do that, I need to spend some time in His Word. I know we've ran into that before with Rebecca and I'm not needy, but I'm the person who comes home and I sort of need attention.
So,
right?
The definition of needy.
And so I get up in the morning and I'm
You
like,
haven't looked at the dictionary lately.
I'll get up in the morning even now and I'll be like, hey, what's going on? I'm up, I'm going to be leaving in a half hour or so. You're going to be here. Why don't you come in the bathroom while I'm brushing my teeth and talk to me, or something like that. And she has done a very good job over the years of saying, that's my time of prayer. So often, when I get up in the morning and I'm getting ready, she's already on her knees in our bedroom praying. And it's a beautiful thing. Now, I would love to talk to her, but as her spouse and wanting to keep God in the center of our relationship, I've learned over the years to enjoy that, to think about that, and to think about those prayers for myself and for our kids, and to thank God for that. So instead of talking to her while I'm brushing my teeth, I'll talk to God, and I'll thank God for giving me a spouse who is in prayer. And so those are things you want to consider. Really, the other thing that we can do is we can ask ourselves really two questions. Is this person drawing me closer to Christ or farther away from Christ? And it's entirely possible for two believers to draw each other away from Christ. Just because the answer to, if your answer is like, holy cow, I've been dating this guy or gal for 3 years and they're affecting my quiet time with the Lord, that doesn't mean break up with them on the way home, okay? That's not what I'm saying, right? It's entirely possible for two godly people to lead each other away in this kind of a situation. And so come back full circle and communicate your intention.
I think the only other thing, and you kind of touched on it, but I noticed this in my relationship with Audrey when we were dating. First few times we hung out, and it would come to a point of, hey, I knew I needed to do something for BSF because I was in leadership and she had just joined, or I needed to spend some quiet time and I hadn't had time to pray. And it was tough to bring up that conversation, but I was like, hey, do you mind if I just go, walk in a quiet room for 5 minutes and come back? And I think the Lord really honored that. And I would say, especially if you're in a dating relationship, this is part of showing the other person who you are, and who you are is a child of the King. And by protecting that time, you're giving an example of what you'd like to model, kind of the rest of your marriage. So I think that, God can use that to really solidify, hey, is this someone that I want to be with for the rest of my life? What are they spending their time with? And the times where you have the conversation of, hey, I think we need to sit down and talk about what we're spending so much time together doing, and maybe some changes that we would like to make to still make sure we're filling ourselves with quiet time with the Lord. And I think that may confirm in the other person, hey, I appreciate that you did that. Thanks for bringing it up. I wouldn't have said something on my own, but I think it's an admirable quality. So I think that's a way that the Lord can kind of confirm that.
The last thing I'd add to that is, I think this all relates to singleness a little bit as well. I think we can make the idea of having a relationship an idol as well. I don't have one, so I'm going to fixate on this, and what does that look like? So surrounding yourself with friends that can encourage you to be in the Word and prioritize well that way is important as well. So let's move on to our next question. Is sex outside of marriage ever okay? Where do we draw the line, and what are some strategies to hold us accountable?
So having 3 teenage girls, I have sex conversations a lot. So I'm not super bashful about any of this kind of stuff because we do talk about it a lot at our house. But thinking through this particular question, Steve and I grew up with kind of these, I would say, 2 very opposite views of sex. On one hand, we grew up in the church and with our parents literally making very clear, don't have sex before marriage. In fact, that was Steve's entire sex talk from his dad. That's it.
Yeah, he pretty much said that and then headed out onto the porch to smoke a cigarette because he was so stressed out about it. I looked at my mom and I said, was that my sex talk? And he's like, I think it was. I'm like, all right, I'm going to bed. I'll tell you what, though, it was effective.
So we had that on one side, and then on the other side, majority of our friends were having sex. And they were fine with it. And they were treating it as no big deal. And so Steve and I, in this dating relationship, and even into our marriage relationship, I think we struggled with what is sex supposed to be? On one hand, it was somewhat of a fearful thing because it had been banged in our head for so long. Don't have it before marriage. Don't have it before marriage. But with just our culture that we lived in and the friends we were around, it created a very distorted view of sex that I think we struggled in. I would say probably almost 10 years into our marriage with sex. And so I can't go into everything, but let me tell you what's been impactful to me as we've navigated this idea of what is sex when you start with God, right? And you begin to look at it from his perspective. And so probably 2 of the more profound truths for me that have transformed my view of sex and what its intent is one, coming to just what is kind of a basic conclusion, but it was an aha moment for me, that guess what? God actually created sex, and this was his great idea. And coming from a fear factor of sex, this really began to change my thinking in that if this is God's idea, and it's what he put within marriage, then within marriage, sex is actually an act of worship. It's an act of glorifying God. And I'm telling you, that radically changed the way that I view what's all that God intended sex to be. That it wasn't just some physical act, that it was intended to be truly an act of worship before him within a marriage context. And the second thing that really changed my thinking is that it is more than a physical act. It was created by God to be an extremely powerful tool in creating unity between a husband and a wife. And that sex goes way beyond just a physical unity, because there is an emotional unity that is created there. There is a spiritual unity with believers, this act of worshiping God together within marriage. And it draws a husband and a wife together. It creates these tight connections that are meant to foster unity, which ultimately brings marriage to a point where it displays God, right? It displays who He is as one true united God, but also His relationship with people. That He is so united with them. But it's got to be in a marriage context, because it's a covenant relationship. And God, in covenant with His people, means He unites Himself with us, but it's with all these promises that He will never leave us. We will never be separated from Him. And so the same is true. This marriage thing is a picture of that relationship with God. It's a covenant relationship. And you enter in, and to have that unity, you also got to have the covenant promises. That those promises, that we're sticking it out thick and thin. And let me tell you, we can tell you some stories about some thick stuff we have been through. But we are going to stick it out because we have made covenant promises to each other. So within marriage, He displays the beauty of God. It's an act of worship. But outside of marriage, it actually distorts the view of God. What brings unity in marriage rips apart outside of marriage. And as we have walked with so many people having sex outside of marriage, we have seen it time and time again rip at relationships, where it causes disunity and dysfunction in relationships. It brings in guilt. It brings in shame. It fosters kind of self-pleasure, we can say, and where people look at sex as just, it becomes the object that the relationship is all about. And so, yeah, I could keep going, but I think you guys got some words to say, so I'll stop right there.
I'll jump in later, so. That's somebody else.
So Rebecca touched on that sex is more than just a physical act. It's emotional and spiritual as well. And one of the verses up there is Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. When the Bible talks about the heart, it often brings in three aspects: mind, affections, and will. And from that flows thoughts, words, and choices. So I found both personally and just talking with friends or family, or just observing people in the Christian circle, because we've been banged in our head on don't have sex before marriage. Sometimes we can overcompensate by maybe going too deep too quickly in the emotional or the spiritual aspect, which is not necessarily a good thing. It can be at times, but that not only you can give too much of your heart away too soon, but also if you get really close really quickly in the emotional and the spiritual, oftentimes the sexual piece is going to be even harder to stay away from. You might even think, like, if I focus on these two, that I won't have temptation in the sexual aspect. Well, Jesus promises we will be tempted. So it's not a matter of when, but it's a matter of if. Oh no, other way around. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But
Okay, 5 people just walked out.
But the good news is that being tempted is not a sin. Jesus himself was tempted, and he was without sin. In 1 Corinthians 10, it says that God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, and he will provide a way out so that you can endure it. In Matthew 26, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I often hear or find myself, you get a gut reaction about something. I would encourage you, listen to that gut reaction, take action from that. And again, bring it to God. You may feel stupid, cowardly, weak, or insert whatever feeling that comes to mind. But ask yourself, would or does God think of me and my current reaction to the situation that way? My guess is that it's the devil whispering that in your ear. And something that's helped me in different things that I've struggled with, one being how I view money, but also another one is thinking of things in the sexual realm. It's not, instead of thinking like, how much can I do, how much can I, test the boundaries, but still be okay. It's more of, I've changed it to, this is a gift from God, so what can I do to glorify and praise God for his amazing gift to me?
I would say, when you look at it, when Rebecca and I got married, it was, I think, a big motivator for me to get married. If I'm honest, we dated for 3.5 years, and I was like, this is the girl I want to marry. I kind of like to have sex with her, and since my dad told me over a cigarette that I couldn't, time to get married. And
That was so romantic.
So here's the thing, though. Once we got married, and the only reason I didn't have sex, I'd love to tell you that it was because of my spiritual conviction, but it wasn't. It was just a decision that I made consciously, saying, you know what, I've got to have a couple of things in my life that I can someday tell my kids I didn't do. And I was sort of running out of options of things, quite honestly, and that was just one that I picked. There was really only two, sex and illegal drugs. Pretty much everything else at that point I had done, and I was like, I'm going to hold on to this one and be able to tell my kids that I didn't have sex. That's the only reason. That's kind of a crummy reason, but that's the only reason. So what happened is, once we got married and had sex, guess what? Box checked. Now all of a sudden I had to find myself in this spot of, what do I pursuing my wife for? Right? Because I already checked the box. I was like the dog chasing the truck. What do you do when you catch it? Right? What do you do when you catch the truck? And so it did. It opened up. So I think not only that it's healthy not to have sex, but for a reason that's rooted in God and this whole idea of God's character. The why is a lot more important here. And it's got to be rooted in your relationship with Christ, that you want to pursue Christ, that you want to pursue a godly relationship, one that honors him. If he knows best how to handle this world and keep everything in balance, he knows what's best for your relationship and what's best for your physical body and what's best for your emotions, what's best for all those things. And he plugs them together and uses this intimacy to develop a couple and to just root them solid to weather storm, difficulty.
I think it might be a disservice to end this question without a little bit touching on the idea that there's forgiveness and grace and mercy if you've walked the road of premarital sex and what that looks like. God's not holding that over you, and there's forgiveness for that and a way to turn from that action and things like that. So, yeah, all very good things. So let's move on to our next question. Is being LGBT against what the Bible teaches? If so, is someone in that community just expected to live a celibate life if they want to be obedient? So this is going to be a question that I will tackle first. I think I'm going to start with saying, if I was asked this question a couple of years ago, I think I'd be very ashamed with the answer in which I would have given, the attitude in which I would have given it. God has really attacked a lot of self-righteousness within myself, the way that I view people within this community, and the way that I talk about, and the way that I don't joke about anymore. And it's my mindset, even when I'm seeing somebody, in the grocery store or something like that, and I'm very thankful for what he's done in my life in the midst of that. God has given me the space, why I'm in this space with people that are, I mean, I have friends that are same-sex attracted and transgender and have gender dysphoria and are in mixed orientation marriages. And we're like going home and having to Google some of these things. I was like, I don't know what this is, but they just trusted me with this. What do I do with that, and how do I walk well with these people who love Jesus but have this thorn in their side that they're not really sure what to do with and walk with. So I wanted to kind of preface this question with that and kind of apologize for my own reaction to that and humanity's reaction to people, and even I'd say Christians. I think we do a good job of holding a Bible in one hand and a sword in the other, and we just don't know how to deal with this well. Yeah, just because people have these temptations doesn't make it a sin, and I think that we miss that a little bit. So, all that being said, yeah, the simplest answer to that is yes. Genesis gives us a very obvious answer to what marriage should be between a man and a woman, like we just spoke about quite a bit. In this Romans passage, we'll touch on quite a bit on why this is a sin and what God views this as. But there's forgiveness, like I was just talking about. One sin is not greater than another, and I think that we often, I think sometimes I can be like, oh, God didn't die for that sin the same way he died for this sin on the cross, but he did. He dealt with all of those things at the cross, whether it's premarital sex or my pride or my self-reliance or selfishness. God's dealt with that at the cross, and there's forgiveness for what that looks like. And I just want to be very careful to say, like, just because it's a desire does not mean that it's sinful, because it's not. Having the same-sex attraction doesn't make it worse than the things that I struggle with when I am struggling with my pride. If you're not acting on these things, this is just something that God is using for you to overcome and to be able to bring him glory in the midst of those things. But yeah, to be obedient, I think God very clearly, like premarital sex and other things, God is asking us to restrain from that to bring him glory.
I'll jump in there a little bit, especially on the second part of that question, because I think something that just, whether LGBTQ or whether straight, we all struggle with sexual desires, right? And I think you come back and again, you start with God. And the God who created sexual desires also gives us the power to control them. He actually is strong enough to cause us to give us the strength, to give us the grace each day to pick up the cross he's called us to bear, whether that's denying homosexual tendencies or lesbian tendencies, whether that's denying premarital sex. God's grace is sufficient. His power is that strong. And I think the second part is just to understand what God's purpose is for all of us, no matter what the sexual orientation. It is to be like Christ. That is where joy and satisfaction are found. And sometimes we think that joy and satisfaction are found when our sexual desires are met. But joy and satisfaction are found as we become like Christ. And God uses even our sexual desires to mold us, to shape us, to prune us, to grow us in self-control, and sometimes dying to self, all for the purpose of making us like Christ. Not because he wants us to live denied, but because he wants us to live in the greatest joy and satisfaction possible.
We're going to make a hard shift from this question to another. So what are the benefits of serving the Lord with your significant other, or is it okay to divide and conquer when it comes to ministry?
Oh, I really like this question, and I'll actually read the first passage, Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10. It says, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up." I found this, especially within a marriage relationship, to be very true. Someone who knows you best or knows you very well can encourage you the specifically and vice versa. In my case, my wife knows my weaknesses and my vulnerabilities and knows me better than almost any other human on the planet. So I'm very thankful for the times that she speaks into my life, and I think she can really reach in and provide support where someone else may not know how to. I actually ran into that today. I had a phone conversation with her at lunch, and she kind of prayed over me, and that's a huge blessing. The Lord doesn't always have to have us serving together. He just happens to have us there now, and I'm thankful for it and kind of living in that. Another passage kind of brings up the fact that the Holy Spirit gives us all different spiritual gifts. So there's going to be times, or perhaps for long periods of time, you may be serving in different aspects just because of the gifts that you have. And that's totally okay. The Lord has given us different passions and different interests and different abilities to do that as He enables. I think one thing I've really learned in my long experience of 1 year and some change of being married is that regardless of whether you're serving together or serving separate, make sure to see the marriage relationship as a ministry within itself, as a way of serving the Lord. Marriage is a picture of Christ and the church, and the Lord has so many ways of, I guess, fulfilling that ministry. Ephesians 5 touches base on husbands loving your wives and wives submitting to your husbands, and that's a high calling. It's not easy. It requires self-sacrifice, time, and energy. Other areas of outside of marriage relationship are important, but should not come before. And I've kind of learned that over the last year or so. So I would say stay in close communication, especially for those who are married. Make sure that you're on the same page about the areas of service that you're doing and the time that you're spending. I am one, and my personality is that I could give a lot of time and maybe not think about how I am spending time into my relationship with my wife, and she's very much quality time, and that is important to her, and I have to force myself quite often to make sure that I'm meeting her needs ahead of my own, or at least making sure that I have the conversation so that we're on the same page, because that can cause some tension quickly. But I'll pass it off to people with more than 1 year of experience if you want to.
So Steve and I have had the opportunity of doing both of these within BSF, where we spent about 10 years within BSF, but in very different roles, different classes, different somewhat schedules even, working with different people. And then for the last 3 years we've been here, and God has brought us into kind of a joint ministry through BSF of kind of co-leading together. And honestly, both seasons were needed, and both seasons had a lot of benefits, and both seasons had challenges. And really we look back and we're like, God knew the season we needed to be in. But we talked about some of the benefits of serving together and separately. Do you want to tackle a few?
Yeah. For me, Rebecca had a more time-consuming role for 10 years. She was leading a class in the Holland area, and her leadership circle was somewhere around 50 to 60 people, and a class of, roughly, let's just say 500. So that's a lot of, and she lectured every single week, and at that time, she lectured for 45 minutes. And so she would, a lot of her time was spent working on BSF, either for leaders meeting or for training. And the blessing of that working apart was that it forced me, a person who struggles with being selfish, and I already confessed to you that I was a little needy, and so she's tied up. And so it forced me to this point, it stretched my faith. It forced me to view myself as a support role, and to find joy in the fact that God was allowing her to minister to other people, and I was a small part of that by being willing to just sacrifice having a relationship, having You know, a date night on the weekends was very rare for 10 years because it was Friday nights were busy, you know, prepping for an early Saturday morning leaders meeting, and Saturday was spent working on a lecture for Monday night oftentimes. So that was a blessing for me, and it was also a challenge in the separate. Another challenge is, you know, you've got these relationships with those that you serve in ministry with. You know, and if for us who've gone on a mission trip or whatever and done a ministry experience with other people, you know what I'm talking about, by that bond that gets built as you serve alongside of other people. And so one of the struggles was, you know, I was serving with a group of men, she was serving with this group of women. We didn't really know who either one was, and it, you know, it was a struggle because how do you talk about each other? These people that mean a lot in your life, and the other person who doesn't know who they are. Also a blessing as well. So I'll let you talk about some of the blessings.
Well, I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to summarize it pretty quickly for Bethany over there, who's trying to keep us on time. But when we served separately, we felt like it developed our individual persons more, that God used that to push us both into places where we developed as people. Individually serving together, we feel like God has used that this season to develop our marriage, learning even to work together, because being married to each other and even knowing each other's personalities is not the same as leading together. And when you have two different personalities, there's a lot of humility to be learned in learning to just work alongside each other with two different styles. So, yeah, so that's kind of where we went. I think you had one caution.
Yeah. So my one caution to that would be this. If you're a guy and you're working closely with another female and you're a married guy or in a committed relationship, I would caution that, because that closeness that develops in that teamwork can be a little bit dangerous inside of a marriage. If you were serving alongside, you know, co-leading with somebody that's not your spouse, I would say caution flag. If you're single, I'd say great idea, right?
It only kind of works. Come on. It's like we're going to meet somebody at the bridal party. No, that doesn't work. But, I mean, maybe it does, but I've been in a lot of weddings and that hasn't worked for me yet. So anyway, that was not scripted at all. So that was bonus for you. We're going to finish up with one last question, and then we'll move on to our segregated portion here. Our last question is, how can I best love my single and married friends, and what are some things that I say or do that unintentionally hurt them?
So oftentimes, especially at this age, when there are friends that one's married or one's single, or there's a group of friends and there's a combination, it's often a result of a fairly recent change. And change can be difficult, but there are some foundational behaviors to grow a strong friendship that don't change whether you're single or you're married. I'm going to give some verses that speak to that. Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourself. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Galatians 6, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Proverbs 17 talks about a friend who loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. In Colossians 3, bear with each other and forgive one another, just as the Lord forgave you. And above all, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. And these are things that don't change when life stages or experiences do. So I'd just say, continue to ask your friends to be part of your life, whether they are recently married or maybe they're in a long-term relationship and find themselves single again. Their availability will likely be different than yours, and they may feel that tension if they're recently married. Sometimes us singletons feel like a third wheel. But I've also heard with a couple of my friends that the husbands feel like a third wheel, so sorry if that happens. Either any of these scenarios, it's a change worth working through. And then again, if they're married, once kids enter the picture, things change again. So it's an adventure worth exploring in all aspects. Something I found to be helpful is to change my expectations and maybe more of a reset. So if you maybe have something that you do routinely with a friend, if their life stage or like something in their life changes, reset that expectation. Have the communication open. Just don't assume and don't back away. And married friends, don't try to marry us off immediately. And us single friends, don't try to keep the married friends the same. We're all changing. Even if we both stayed single, like if you have really best friends and you both stay single, you're gonna change as a person, so.
Yeah, I think I'd only add to that as, right, we're more than just our relationship status, right? So just because your friends are married or they have kids, they're like, oh, how's your kid? I have no idea what else to talk to you about because now you have a child. Like, wait a second, they have another life, and hey, I'm more than my singleness, and you're more than just your marriage. And yes, these are big parts of who you are in your life, but there's more to you and more to them than just that, and to acknowledge and bring that up in conversation. And I guess from a single point of view is, don't just assume that we're not content in the stage of life that we're in. I mean, content, I'm sorry I just said that. You know, but it just sounds so cliche. But just, we may be enjoying this stage of life, and that's okay. And so it's not just this singleness. I'll never forget, I was at church in a Sunday school class, and per normal, I left like 2 chairs next to me, and I was just sitting there waiting for people to come in, and somebody walked by me and said, oh, it gets better when you're married. Whoa, what? I was fine, I am fine, thank you. That was a comment that was unnecessary. You just put a problem on me that wasn't there, and that was kind of frustrating to me as a single, that they were seeing me that way. Oh, like, you're obviously not okay because you're sitting here by yourself. Nope, I spent a lot of time alone. Pretty used to it, it's okay. So, yeah, anyway, that's all I would say for that. But we are over time. Shocker, as the young adults, that's kind of what we do. But we are gonna just pray, finish up, and then announce our winners for our dessert competition, and then give you some further directions to what we're doing next and where you're going. Yeah, so please stick around. I think this next portion is going to be really great as well. So, Andrew's going to finish up here in prayer, and we'll go.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to get together to talk about and hear your truths around dating and relationships. May you continue to work in our hearts so that we will become more like you. If there are changes that have to be made in our own lives, would you give us the courage to take that first step in making them? Would we not rely on our own strength, but would we rely fully on you? Thank you, Lord, for your forgiveness and your unconditional love. We are undeserving, but so grateful for your grace. May our lives reflect that gratitude and bring your name glory. It's in your powerful name that we pray. Amen.